Hello and welcome to this presentation on the changes to the rules of squash that have just come into effect on the 1st of September. If we have a look at the rules, we'll see that the rules have changed in number from 15 down to 14. So we have one fewer rule. That's because of the amalgamation of the old Rule 12 on distraction and the old Rule 13 on fallen object, both becoming the new Rule 12 conditions of play. We'll notice Rule 13 is now called illness, injury and blood injury, as opposed to what it was called previously, and the old Rule 15 on conduct now becomes Rule 14. The number of appendices have changed from 8 to 6, and that's due to the abolition of the 2 appendices referring to the 3 referee system and alternative scoring. And you'll notice that the words and terms used in Appendix 1 are all defined in that appendix, and throughout the new rules those terms and words are italicized when met. So for example, Rule 2.3, a match is normally the best of 5 games, but maybe the best of 3 games. We'll notice match and games, both terms used in Appendix 1 are italicized, and that carries on throughout the 14 rules. Then we have new wording to some of the rules to better explain that rule. So that, for example, in Rule 8 on interference, where previously your opponent was entitled to what was referred to as unobstructed direct access to the ball, it's now referred to as simply access to the ball, the 2 adjectives being deemed unnecessary. Similarly, in Rule 8.8.2 on creating your own interference, so to speak, it now reads, if the striker had access but took a path to the ball that caused interference and then requested a let, no let is allowed, tidying up somewhat on the existing rules. Similarly, the definition of what's meant by turning has been changed. Now remember, these are changes to wording to help interpret or apply the rule more clearly. These are not changes to the rules themselves. We have in fact 12 changes to the rules, if you take new Rule 12 as one of those changes. Half of those changes refer to changes in time. There have been 6 time changes. Now the interval between the warm-up and the first game has been reduced from 90 seconds to 1 minute. And the intervals between games has changed from 90 seconds to 2 minutes, thereby making the amateur and professional game the same in that context. Then, instead of 90 seconds being the time allowed for a change of equipment, it's 2 minutes. So there are 3 changes on that slide. Then in relation to injury, as you know, you have self-inflicted, contributed and opponent-inflicted injuries. And in the case of a self-inflicted injury, instead of saying you have 3 minutes recovery time, it says up to 3 minutes. And similarly with the contributed injury, instead of saying you have 15 minutes, you have up to 15 minutes. But importantly, in Rule 13.242, the additional 15 minutes that previously applied at the discretion of the referee has now been abolished, because the rule goes on to say the player must then, that's after the 15 minutes, the player must then resume play or concede the match. New Rule 12. Well, 12.1 is the old Rule 12 on distraction unchanged, and 12.2 is Rule 13 unchanged on fallen object. And we have a new Rule 12.3 on what's referred to as court conditions. The entire new rule is presented there, but you'll notice that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, the first 6 points in it were there previously. They're just all being shown together there, things that affect the conditions of play on court and referring out to the applicable rules. It's when you get to Rule 7, 12.3.7 that you'll see the change. If a player, which we'll read through, if a player while attempting to play the ball has left a wet area on the court due to slipping or lunging or diving or any part of their body touching the floor, then firstly, the player who caused the wet area must continue to play or concede the rally. In other words, the player who causes the dampness, if they're the ones to ask for a let, the correct decision will be no let. The opponent may request a let before hitting the ball. If play continues, neither play may request a let for safety reasons. And 4, if the referee believes that the wet area was caused deliberately to gain an advantage, the referee must apply Rule 14 on conduct. And then 12.3.8, I suppose, reminds us that the referee decides if conditions are safe for play to continue, and the referee may allow a let without a request having been made, stopping play if necessary for safety reasons. The changes there really are 12.3.7. Then going to Rule 13 on injury, illness, injury and blood injury. As previously mentioned, there's a slight change to the name of the rule. Instead of bleeding, it says and blood injury. There's an important note at the start of Rule 13 to the effect that if time is allowed for recovery at the end of a game, the time allowed, be it 3 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever applies, includes the 2-minute interval between games. It includes the interval between games. And then there's a slight tweak to illness. You know that for illness, the player must play on or concede the game taking the interval. In other words, there's no interval allowed for illness. Illness has had physical impediment added in there, and a blister being given as a further example of injury. Sorry, not injury. A blister being the example of physical impediment for which you're not going to get a let. They've introduced the notion of bleeding from pre-existing wounds, and just like pre-existing injury, there'll be no time allowed for it. You must concede the game in progress or play on. Rule 14 on conduct. Essentially what's happened here is that they've made 2 changes, making explicit in the wording what was already being applied in practice in the professional game. That turning can be considered dangerous play, and that attempting to influence the referee is deemed to be unacceptable behaviour. And you see it there in the restated Rule 14.6, listing what's looked on as unacceptable behaviour, requiring the player or requiring the referee to penalise the player, to include 14.6.4, deliberate or dangerous play, including an excessive racket swing, and now including turning. And 14.6.6, the addition of attempting to influence the referee, and that would apply where one player asks for a let, and the other player immediately intervenes with their tuppence worth, explaining why it's not a let or whatever. That's now deemed to be attempting to influence the referee, is unacceptable behaviour, and must be penalised by the referee applying the code of conduct. Thanks for taking time to check out the changes in these rules, and I hope you found the presentation somewhat helpful. You'll find useful resources on the Squash Ireland website, and that includes a copy of both the changes to the rules in squash, where the changes are highlighted, and a copy of the new rules themselves, effective 1st of September 2025. Thank you for your attention.